Now we want to look at the managing, the thing that the manager does. So the managing is the relationship between you and the thing you are attempting to manage. What is the quality of this relationship? How does this relationship proceed? We relate to anything with the inner personality of mind and intellect. Yes, we use the physical body, but really that's just a vehicle to get us from place to place. It's just a receiver of information, of stimuli. Stimuli come in from the external environment. They're captured by the physical body. But you wouldn't say that you're relating to that environment with your physical body. You relate to it with your mind and intellect, your inner personality. So I always give the same example to sort of illustrate this idea. The September 11 attacks. All right, the towers come down. You imagine one person watching that, and of course they are shocked, they're horrified, there's deep sadness and sorrow and all the rest of it. Another person watching the exact same scenario celebrates, filled with joy. They are relating to the exact same environment in a very different way. The stimuli are being received by the physical body for both of them, that's common, but the relationship to the experience differs because of the quality of the mind and intellect. So it's the quality of the mind and intellect that determines the quality of our relationship. So this is where we want to be placing the focus of our attention when it comes to self-development, when it comes to understanding how to improve our managing capacities. So, of these two, mind and intellect, the intellect is the subtler of the equipments. Right? Again, in the interest of time, I won't describe what we mean by subtle. We can get into it as the course continues. But very quickly, it means control and pervasiveness. When we say the intellect is subtler than the mind, we say that it pervades the mind. It exists where the mind does and exists beyond it. Your mind can only go into the past. It only deals with memory. Your intellect can go there, and it can project things into an unknown future. And it can control. This is really the essential aspect. When we talk about control, what we're saying is that if A controls B, it means that when a change in A occurs, there will necessarily be a change in B. Not necessarily the other way around. A is subtler than B, A controls B. A change in B will not necessarily result in a change in A. There's no direction of control there. Because that's the case, because the intellect is subtler, because it pervades the mind, exists outside it, and can control it, the intellect is the most important aspect when it comes to enhancing our capacity for self-management. The mind cannot control the intellect, but the intellect can control the mind. And it is the control of the mind that is the essence of self-development. So, we want to look at different ways that we can relate to our environment. Any questions on that before we move on? All right. So any activity that we engage in, that we enter into, it can be propelled either by the mind alone, by the intellect alone, or by a confluence of the mind and intellect. And they've given two words to describe this. When the mind alone is functioning, when it's the mind alone that initiates a particular activity, it's called indiscriminate. When the intellect participates, discriminate. Right. We always use a very simple, same example for this, diabetic and a sweet. So you hold a sweet out to a diabetic. Now the mind in him has a preference, has a liking, has a desire for sweets. So even though his body is standing stationary, he hasn't moved a muscle, the mind in him has already reached out and said, ooh, I like sweets, take it. This is what the mind is doing. Nothing wrong with the mind. You can't blame the mind for being the mind. It likes sweets. What to do, yeah? The intellect in him has the capacity for objective observation, analysis, conclusion, decision-making. That's a sweet. We've got diabetes. If we eat that, we're going to get sick. Therefore, we should say no. This is how the intellect functions. Now, if the mind is stronger than the intellect, what happens? He takes the sweet, yum yum, and suffers the effects thereof. If the intellect is stronger than the mind, no thank you very much. It's the right choice. It's the wiser choice to make. We are all diabetics, and we are living in a world of sweets. This is what we need to understand. Everywhere you go, there is a sweet just around the corner for your mind. The question is, are you going to choose it based on your mind, or are you going to choose it based on your intellect's discrimination? Now, people often say, in fact, I've heard this a number of times, I make decisions with my gut. I make decisions with my feelings. I go with my feelings. Vedanta does not preclude making decisions with your feelings. It simply says, make sure that something is there to observe the feeling that you are experiencing. We are all subject to bias. The problem with bias, in fact, the biggest problem with bias is what? Just give me anything.
It's emotional.
It's emotional.
Judgment that's already made.
Judgment that's already made. Yep, that's true. What else?
We're right.
We think we're right. Perfect. We're biased means we don't know we're biased. If I knew that I was biased, then it wouldn't technically be a bias. The fact that it's a bias means I don't know it's happening. It's happening to me and I don't know it's happening. This is what we mean by bias. So it's important that we understand that every experience we go into, there's going to be some bias coming from my own mind. Yeah.
So would you call bias mind or intellect then? Because it's kind of an automatic.
Yeah. So bias, when we use it in this context, bias means mind. It's undue influence. It's influence that you haven't asked for. The moment it's influence that you have asked for, then it's discrimination. So that's a good question again, because you can actually say, okay, I know that I've got a bias for thinking people are criticizing my work. I've got sort of a little inferiority here, and anytime someone offers me advice, I think they're criticizing me. I've got this bias. So what I can do is function to offset that bias by using a particular thought in the opposite direction. But I can't make that adjustment unless I'm aware of my bias. So understanding that our biases are always going to be playing in the personality is essential. The moment we make that recognition, we will recognize I have to put something in place to safeguard against functioning only on bias. What is that thing? We're going to use this word over and over again. It's the intellect. So, this is again from the text. So the labels here, insane, hysterical, eccentric, emotional, and sane, don't worry too much about those in terms of specific definitions. They're just kind of placeholders more than anything else. But what it's highlighting is that when 100% of our activities are driven by the mind alone, impulsive or indiscriminate, and nothing is discriminative, this is insanity. So whatever your mind throws up at you, and your mind is constantly erupting with feelings, with ideas, with symbols, with memories, with all this kind of stuff. If everything that your mind threw up at you, you intrinsically believed the truth of it and recognized this is an appropriate way to function, what would you call yourself? What would you call others who function in this way? It's a form of insanity. If you've been down, I mean, I'm sure it's around this area too, but where I live, close to where I live, there's a number of individuals who are homeless. They live in specific areas, and you'll see them every morning walking up and down or standing, yelling at somebody, actually having a conversation with another human being that they can perceive. The mind is throwing things up, they inherently believe it. So if everything that the mind throws up at us we intrinsically believe to be true and we function on it, that's insanity. I like sweets, I'll take it. As we become more discriminative, as we engage with the intellect more and more, what happens is that we start to get closer to sanity. So a person is considered to be 100% sane when everything they do has that safeguard of intellectual governance. Everything that the mind throws up, You don't suppress it. You don't squash it down. You don't try to get rid of it. You simply assess it. Someone says something to you that's a little bit critical, and the mind throws up an arrogant, barbed retort. Swallow. I'm going to swallow that. Not necessary. It's a sane. It's the wise move to make. Intellect governs the mind. This is what we're talking about. This is total sanity. And as we get closer to insanity, we get different ranges. So emotional, eccentric, and hysterical. My brother's a police officer, and he's told me a number of times where he has gone to and knocked on someone's door at 1 o'clock in the morning. Mrs. Jones, yes. Is your son Andrew Jones? Yes. I'm very sorry to tell you he's been involved in a fatal accident. He gets attacked. He's been attacked by parents, loved ones, physically. He's been physically attacked, shooting the messenger. Why? Hysterical. Now, of course, he understands. He just stands back and waits for the flurry to finish. But the idea is that when we are fully or not fully in control of our own emotions, this is where we get to. From sane, emotional, eccentric, to hysterical, to completely insane. So if we want to understand this, that the essence of self-management is the intellect governing the mind. Thinking and choosing without the bias. This is where our bias lives, in the mind. There's nothing wrong with the mind. We want to be very clear about this. In fact, one of the analogies we often use is that the intellect is like the adult, the mind is like a child. If you go away, you've got a 6-year-old. You've got a couple of 6-year-olds at home, and you decide, it's been a long week, I'm off to Vegas. And so you go for a 3-day bender in Vegas, you leave the kids at home. What do you come back to? Yep, chaos. What else? Handcuffs, that's it. You can't blame the children for being children. That's just their nature. Of course they're going to run chaos when you're not there. They're functioning perfectly according to their nature. And so that's what happens when the child runs the household. The child is not qualified to run a household. It's not their job. So too, your mind is not qualified to run your life. It has beautiful qualities. They must be harnessed and used so that you can be a full human being. But it's not qualified to run your life. It's not its job. Don't expect it to. That's for the intellect. So it's important that we understand that we are not suppressing the mind or trying to get rid of the mind. It has this incredible power to it. We want to redirect the mind. Then we can harness it. So this is the other analogy that we often use here, the banks of a river. If the water's coming in hard and fast and the banks of the river are weak and shallow, the water inundates the fields, it destroys crops, homes and houses. When the banks of the river are strong and deep, you take all of that energy and you can harness it and use it for the well-being of the community. So too with your emotions. If you can harness them, they can be redirected towards achieving your goals. It's the wellspring of feeling and empathy towards others. And they also constitute essential capital for reinvestment back into your self-development. So in terms of redirecting your emotions, you redirect them back here now. Summary. So this is the finish. So when we're talking about managing and manager, the manager is this body, mind, intellect thing that we've got at our disposal. The managing is making sure that that manager has a correct relationship with the world, the thing that you want to manage. We relate via the mind and intellect. If the mind leads, it's detrimental to the things that we are trying to achieve. When the intellect guides the mind, this is effective self-management. So the intellect is to be developed and applied in all areas of life. Okay, what's our time? 8:31, not bad. Okay, so that's our hard cutoff. For those who have to leave, thank you very much. You're welcome to leave. If anyone has questions that they want to take up in the next period of time, I'm happy to hang around and answer them. But otherwise, thank you guys.